The man in the black suit grabbed the trauma nurse by her collar and slammed her against the wall, hard enough to crack the drywall behind her head. His badge caught the fluorescent light as he leaned in close, voice dropping to something colder than a threat. "Walk away from that room, right now, or I will make sure you disappear so completely that nobody will even know what name to put on the report." 20 feet away, through reinforced glass, a dying Navy SEAL sniper was bleeding out on a gurney, and this government agent was burning the only person who could save him. Because she was never supposed to be found. Subscribe now, drop your city in the comments, and stay with me, because this story goes places nobody saw coming. If you are watching this right now, please take 1 second to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop your city in the comments below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now stay with me, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about who the real heroes are. The emergency room at St. Arden Medical Center had seen its share of bad nights. Gunshot wounds came through on Friday evenings with a grim regularity that the staff had long since stopped being surprised by. Overdoses, car accidents, industrial injuries. The ER had absorbed them all with the practiced efficiency of people who had learned to compartmentalize suffering the way other people filed taxes. But 8:14 p.m. on a Tuesday in late October was not a normal bad night. The paramedics who burst through those double doors were not moving with the controlled urgency of professionals managing a situation. They were moving like people who were genuinely afraid. 42-year-old male, multiple GGASWs, 2 to the left flank, 1 through and through to the right GGK of, massive blood loss, BP is 60 over palp and dropping. We lost him twice in the rig and brought him back both times. He's been fighting us the entire way. The lead paramedic, a heavy-set man named Torres, whose shirt was soaked through with someone else's blood, was talking fast and moving faster, and the gurney rattling beneath his hands was carrying something that looked less like a patient and more like a war. The man strapped to that gurney was enormous. Not just tall, constructed. Even with the oxygen mask half ripped from his face, even with the improvised tourniquets cutting into his arms, even with 2 IV lines he had already partially pulled out, he radiated a physical authority that made the younger nurses instinctively step back. His face was a mask of controlled fury, jaw clenched so hard the muscle along his cheekbone stood out like a cable under tension. His eyes were open, pale gray, and they were not the eyes of a man who was scared. They were the eyes of a man running threat assessments. "Get your hands off me!" The voice was low, gravel, and rust, barely above a whisper, but it cut through the noise of the ER like a blade. "I said, get your hands off me right now. Sir, you need to stay still. You are losing blood." "I know exactly how much blood I'm losing." He turned his head with visible effort and fixed the paramedic with those gray eyes. "I've tracked blood loss in the field. At this rate, I have approximately 11 minutes before I'm non-functional, which means I have 11 minutes to make sure this room is secure before I let anyone touch me." Dr. Marcus Webb, the attending physician who had been pulling night shifts at St. Arden for 11 years, had heard a lot of things from patients in crisis. Denial, bargaining, rage, prayers. He had never heard a dying man calculate his own survival window with the detachment of someone checking a weather report. "Sir, I need you to listen to me very carefully." Webb stepped forward, hands raised, voice steady. "You have been shot 3 times. You are in hemorrhagic shock. If we do not get you into surgery in the next few minutes, you will die. Do you understand that?" "I understand that you're standing between me and the door." The man's hand moved, slow but deliberate, to the side rail of the gurney, and his fingers wrapped around it with a grip that made the metal creak. "Who else is in this building right now? How many entry points? Are there security cameras on this floor?" "Sir, answer the question." Webb looked at Torres. Torres looked back with an expression that said, plainly, "I tried to warn you about this guy." "There are security personnel at the main entrance," Webb said slowly. There are cameras, yes. Sir, I need to know your name. No, you don't. We need to know your name so we can contact your emergency. No. The word was flat, final, a door slamming shut. No names, no contacts, nobody gets called. You understand me? If you pick up a phone in this room, I will know it. There were 7 people in that trauma bay now, and every single one of them had gone very quiet. The kind of quiet that settles over a room when the situation has suddenly exceeded the protocols everyone trained for. 2 nurses exchanged a look. One of the residents, a young woman named Patel, who had been at St. Arden for exactly 4 months, had taken 3 unconscious steps backward toward the wall. Webb straightened up. He was not an easily rattled man. He had worked trauma in Baltimore before St. Arden, had done a stint with Doctors Without Borders in 2 different conflict zones, and he had a professional stubbornness that his colleagues either admired or found exhausting, depending on their mood. He looked at the man on the gurney, at the blood that was already pooling beneath him with a speed that made Webb's chest tighten, and he made a decision. Fine, Webb said. No names. I'm going to call you John, because I need to call you something. John, you have a sucking chest wound developing on your left side, and in about 3 minutes it's going to collapse your lung. When that happens, you won't be able to have this conversation. You won't be able to assess anything, and you will be entirely at our mercy. So I'm going to suggest that you consider allowing us to help you now, while you still have the option of being a participant in this. The gray eyes moved to Webb, held him. You've been in the field, the man said. It wasn't a question. 2 years in South Sudan, 1 in Haiti. A long pause. The monitor screamed a warning. The blood pressure was dropping again, and Torres made an involuntary move forward that he stopped himself from completing. You move anybody to those exits, the man said, or you send anybody out of this room to make a call, and I walk out of here. You understand? I walk out. I don't care what's falling apart inside me. I understand, Webb said. Then work fast. What happened in the next 4 minutes would later be described by every person in that trauma bay as the most difficult medical situation they had ever personally witnessed. Not because of the injuries, though the injuries were severe, but because of the patient. He flinched away from every IV attempt. He slapped a nurse's hand when she tried to apply pressure to his shoulder wound with enough force to send her stumbling. He pulled the oxygen mask off twice. When Dr. Patel tried to cut away his shirt to assess the flank wounds, he seized her wrist and held it in a grip she later said felt like a handcuff. Left pocket, he said to Patel, voice grinding but precise. Inside the shirt, there's a field dressing. Use that first. Sir, we have sterile. Use that first. There's something in the dressing, something important. Don't lose it. Patel stared at him. He released her wrist. She reached into the pocket of his shredded shirt and pulled out a small, compressed field dressing. The military kind, olive drab, vacuum sealed, and taped to the outside of it was a folded piece of paper no bigger than a business card, sealed in what appeared to be a small evidence bag. She looked at Webb. He gave her a barely perceptible nod. She set it on the tray beside her without looking at it again. Good, the man said. His voice was starting to fray at the edges, the effort of maintaining control eating into what little reserve he had left. Good. Now listen. The chest. Go. Webb was already there. He had no idea how this patient knew about the developing pneumothorax before the imaging confirmed it. The answer, he would realize later, was that the man had been quietly assessing his own internal pressure differential by tracking the changes in his own breath sounds. But there was no time to think about that now. He talked through every step of what he was doing with a running commentary, not because procedure required it, but because he had intuited, quickly, that giving this man information was the only currency this transaction was going to accept. Needle decompression, second intercostal space, mid-clavicular line. You're going to feel pressure and then release. I know what it feels like. but the man held still. That was the thing. Through everything, through every confrontation and every resistance, the moment a procedure was explained to him in clinical, honest language, his body cooperated. As if his muscles understood the logic even when his instincts were screaming the opposite. The needle went in. The hiss of released pressure was audible. The man exhaled slowly, a long, shuddering breath that seemed to cost him something fundamental. And for one brief moment, the mask slipped. The pain showed. Not dramatically. There was no cry, no visible breakdown, but something moved through his face that was purely human, purely vulnerable. And then it was gone, and the mask was back up. BP is coming up, Torres said quietly. 72 over 40. Still bad, but still bad, Webb agreed. John, we need to move you to surgery, right now. The damage to your flank is no surgery. The room stopped. I'm sorry? No surgery, no anesthesia. Nobody puts me under in this building. His voice was flat again, the vulnerability completely sealed away. You patch me well enough to keep me functional, and then I walk out of here on my own. That's the arrangement. That is not, Webb caught himself, reset. That is medically not possible. You have fragmented tissue in your left flank that I cannot address without going in. You will develop sepsis within 24 hours if we don't clean that wound. And you will. 24 hours is enough time. Enough time for what? No answer. Webb turned around. He needed a moment. He needed a wall to put between himself and this situation for approximately 10 seconds. Because the combination of professional obligation, human compassion, and sheer bafflement was creating a pressure in his chest that felt uncomfortably similar to the chest wall issue he just decompressed in his patient. He turned to face the room, and that was when he noticed Nurse Ava Rios for the first time. She had been there the whole time. He realized that now. She had come in with the rest of the trauma team when the call went out, and she had done nothing unusual. Had drawn up medications when asked, had handed instruments with quiet efficiency, had stayed in her lane the way a new staff member was supposed to. She was maybe 30, olive-skinned, with her dark hair pulled back in a way that made her look younger than she probably was. And she was standing against the far wall with her arms crossed and her eyes on the patient with an expression that Webb could not immediately categorize. She wasn't afraid. That was the first thing. Fear had different textures in people who were trying to hide it, and he had become expert at reading those textures after years of working with young residents and nursing students. This woman was not afraid. She was, he searched for the word, still. Not passive, not frozen, purposefully still, the way a person is still when they are thinking very fast and very carefully. Rios, he said. She looked at him. Anything useful you can add here? It was a half-frustrated, half-genuine question. He was not dismissing her, but something in his tone, the way he said it, with the particular kind of exhausted irritation that senior medical staff sometimes directed at junior staff without quite meaning to, landed wrong in the room. And one of the other nurses, a woman named Carla, who had been at St. Arden for 6 years, made a small sound under her breath that was not quite a laugh. She's been here 3 weeks, Carla murmured to nobody in particular. She's going to tell us to try holding his hand and speaking softly. Ava looked at Carla, then she looked at the patient. She uncrossed her arms. She walked toward the gurney, not fast, not with the aggressive, purposeful stride of someone making a point. She walked the way you walk when you know exactly where you're going and you have no particular interest in being watched while you do it. Rios, Webb said. What are you? She leaned down. Whatever she said it quietly enough that no one else in the room heard the words. She was close to the patient's ear, and she spoke for perhaps 4 seconds, and then she straightened up. The man on the gurney had gone completely still. Not the resistant, coiled stillness of before. Not the controlled, threat-assessing stillness of a combatant. He was still the way a man goes still when something has hit him somewhere he didn't know he could still be hit. His gray eyes were fixed on the ceiling. His jaw was still clenched, but the quality of it had changed. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something older and more complicated, something closer to shock. His hands, which had been gripping the side rails with white-knuckled force, slowly released. The monitor beeped. His heart rate, which had been arrhythmic and climbing, began, visibly, measurably, to come down. "What did you just say to him?" Webb asked. Ava looked at him. Her expression was completely composed. "I told him his blood pressure," she said. Nobody believed her. She knew nobody believed her. She did not elaborate. "John," Webb said, addressing the patient again, trying to regain his footing. "John, I need you to look at me." The gray eyes came down from the ceiling. They moved to Webb. And then, slowly, they moved to Ava Rios. There was something in that look that Webb had no framework for. It was not the way a patient looked at a nurse. It was not gratitude, exactly. It was recognition, the specific, complex recognition of two people who share a context that no one else in the room has access to. "She stays," the man said. His voice had changed. Something in the gravel had shifted. Not softer, exactly, but different, like a key that had found its lock. "She stays in this room. And the rest of you, only do what she approves. You understand? Not what Webb says, what she says." The silence that followed was extraordinary. Webb looked at Ava. Ava looked at the patient. The patient was looking at the ceiling again, breathing with slow, deliberate effort, and the hand that had released the side rail had moved, almost imperceptibly, to a position of slightly less defensive tension. "Carla," Webb said very quietly, "get me a chart started. Make it lean. No names, no identifying information yet, just vitals and interventions." "On what name?" Webb glanced at Ava. She said nothing. "Doe," he said. "John Doe for now." He pulled Ava aside, 2 steps away from the gurney, which was the most privacy the room was going to offer, and kept his voice at a level that required her to lean in slightly to hear. "What is going on?" he said. "And I need you to tell me right now, because I have a man on that table who is going to need surgical intervention within the hour, regardless of what he's willing to consent to. And whatever leverage you have just established with him is either going to save his life or complicate it in ways I am not prepared for." Ava considered him. She had a way of considering people that felt thorough, like she was running some kind of internal checklist before deciding how much to give them. "He needs the wound packed," she said, "properly, with the right material. He'll tolerate it if I do it." "Rios, that's not what I asked." "I know." A pause. "Pack the wound, stabilize his pressure, and give him 30 minutes. That's what I'm asking for. 30 minutes. To do what?" She looked at him for a long moment. Outside the trauma bay, through the small rectangular window in the door, the sounds of the regular ER floated in. A phone ringing, someone asking about a chart, the distant mechanical beep of a machine that needed attention. The ordinary percussion of a night that was not ordinary at all. "To find out why he's really here," she said. Webb stared at her. In 11 years of emergency medicine, he had never had a nurse say those words to him, and he found, to his considerable unease, that he did not have an immediate response to them. 3 weeks, he said finally. "What?" "You've been on this floor for 3 weeks." He wasn't accusing her. He was, in his own way, asking her something more complicated. He was asking who she was. He was asking what she was. He was asking why a man who had rejected every person in this room for the past 20 minutes had gone still at 4 words from a nurse who had been here for 3 weeks. Ava looked at him, and then she did something he would think about later, in the quiet of his own apartment, when he was trying to make sense of the night. She put her hand briefly on his arm, not aggressive, not demanding, the touch of someone who has long since learned to make human contact without revealing what it costs. And she said very quietly, "Let me work." He let her work. She moved back to the gurney and she spoke to the patient in a low, continuous voice. Not soothing exactly. It wasn't the voice people use with frightened children, but level and precise, the kind of voice that conveys competence so clearly it becomes its own form of sedative. She told him what she was going to do before she did it. She told him why. She said things that were clinically accurate and tactically specific, and the man listened in a way that he had not listened to anyone else in the room. And when she asked him to turn slightly to allow access to the left flank wound, he turned. His face when she worked was something the young resident Patel would remember for the rest of her career. Not because it was dramatic, because it was the opposite of dramatic. It was the face of a man who had made a decision, not to submit, not to surrender, but to trust. And whatever that trust was built on, whatever history existed between this man and this woman that the rest of them were not party to, it was load-bearing. It was holding something up. "Tell me about the paper," Ava said as she worked, quietly, conversationally. The man's eyes moved to the tray where the field dressing had been placed, and the evidence-bagged note beside it. "Not yet," he said. "Okay. Not until I know who else is listening." Ava didn't look up from what she was doing. "Nobody's listening that matters," she said. A long silence. The monitor beeped steadily. The blood pressure had climbed to 88/50, still critical, still dangerous, but heading in the right direction. "They burned the nest," he said finally. The room stilled. Not the dramatic stilling of a television moment, but the particular quiet of people who don't know what something means, but understand instinctively that it matters. "When?" Ava asked. 40 minutes before I got here. Someone gave up the position." His voice was very controlled now, controlled with the specific effort of someone who is managing both physical pain and the thing that is worse than physical pain, the specific, nauseating weight of betrayal. "Only 4 people knew where I was. 4 people on our side." Ava's hands kept moving, steady, precise. She did not react with her face or her voice, but something in her posture changed, an infinitesimal settling, a weight accepted. "And you came here," she said. "I came here," he confirmed. And then very quietly, with an exhaustion that had nothing to do with blood loss, "Because the only thing I trusted was that you'd be here." The room was completely silent now. Webb, standing against the far wall, felt the hairs on his arms stand up in a way that had nothing to do with the temperature. Carla, who had been charting with the practiced detachment of a 6-year veteran, had stopped typing. Dr. Patel was barely breathing. Outside the trauma bay door, entirely unnoticed by anyone inside the room, 2 men in dark suits had arrived. They stood at the window. They did not speak to each other. They watched. "Okay," Ava said. Her voice was absolutely steady. "Okay, here's what's going to happen. You're going to let me finish this, and you're going to stay still, and in about 20 minutes, you're going to be stable enough to tell me everything. And then we're going to figure out who they sent." The man on the gurney looked at her for a long moment. The gray eyes, which had been threat assessing everything in the room since the moment he arrived, had settled, fixed on her face with a focus that was different from the combat readiness of before. Older, more complicated. "You have no idea what you're walking back into," he said. Ava applied the final piece of packing to the wound and pressed with steady, professional pressure. His body tensed against the pain and then deliberately relaxed. "No," she agreed, "but I never did." Webb saw them first. He had stepped back to give Ava room to work, and in doing so he had shifted his angle just enough to catch the reflection in the glass panel beside the door. 2 shapes standing in the corridor, perfectly still, watching everything inside the trauma bay with the kind of professional detachment that did not belong on a hospital floor at 8:40 at night. He did not react. He was good at not reacting. 11 years of emergency medicine had given him a face that could absorb almost anything without transmitting it outward. But his body knew something was wrong before his mind had finished processing it, and his hand found Carla's arm, and squeezed once, firmly, without looking at her. Carla looked up from the chart. He cut his eyes toward the door. She looked back at him. Her fingers went still on the keyboard. Neither of them said anything. At the gurney, Ava was still working, still talking in that low, precise voice that had somehow become the structural beam holding the whole room together. The patient, John, as Webb had taken to thinking of him, because the alternative was to keep calling him the sniper, and that felt like it was accelerating something, had his eyes closed now. Not unconscious. The quality of his stillness was too deliberate for unconsciousness. He was resting in the way people rest when they have made a decision to conserve, when they are managing something internally and have chosen to trust their external environment enough to redirect that energy inward. "Pressure's holding at 91/58, Torres said from the monitor. His voice was carefully neutral in the way that meant he too had noticed the men outside and was making an active choice not to acknowledge them. "Good," Ava said. "John, I need you to tell me about your breathing. Rate it for me on a scale." 6, he said without opening his eyes. "Out of 10? Out of functional." Ava absorbed this without comment. "Okay, I'm going to adjust the chest seal. You'll feel pressure on your left side." "I know." She worked. The room breathed. Outside the door, the two suits had not moved. 8:43 p.m. It was Torres who broke first. He was not built for sustained tension the way the hospital staff were. His world was the acute emergency, the controlled chaos of extraction and transport, and the particular sustained dread of a room being watched by people who had not announced themselves was a different animal entirely. He leaned toward Webb with the practiced casualness of someone pretending to check a monitor reading. "You know those guys?" he murmured. "No," Webb said. "They've been there 4 minutes." "I know. You going to do something about it?" Webb looked at Ava. She had not turned around. She gave no visible indication of having heard the exchange, which in itself told him something, because he had already learned, in the 40 minutes since she had stepped forward in this room, that Ava Rios heard everything. "Not yet," he said. Torres made a sound in his throat that was not quite agreement, but was close enough to it. He went back to his monitor. At the gurney, John's hand moved. It was subtle, just his right hand, shifting on the surface of the mattress, but Ava caught it, and she straightened slightly, and her eyes went to the door. And for the first time since she had taken charge of this space, Webb saw something cross her face that was not calm. It was brief, a tightening around the eyes, a fractional compression of her lips, and then it was gone. But it was there. "How many entry points to this room?" John asked. His voice was quiet and level, and his eyes were still closed. "One door," Webb said before he had consciously decided to answer. "One observation window, no secondary access. Corridor to the left of that door, where does it go?" "Supply rooms, locker room at the end, service elevator." A pause. "Is the service elevator keyed?" "Yes." "Good." Another pause. "Ava, I hear you," she said. "The paper." She reached for the evidence bag on the tray without hesitation, as if she had been waiting for him to come back to it. She held it up, looked at it briefly, and then looked at him. "You want me to open it?" "Read it to yourself first." She opened the bag, unfolded the paper. Webb watched her read it. Her face gave away nothing. She might have been reading a supply requisition form. Her expression was that controlled. But she read it twice, and on the second pass her jaw tightened in a way that her control almost, but not entirely, managed to suppress. She refolded it, put it back in the bag. "Out loud," John said. "Not with extra ears in the corridor," she said. His eyes opened. He looked at her with those gray eyes, and she met them steadily. And something passed between them that was not words and did not need to be. "All right," he said. 8:49 p.m. Webb made his decision. He walked to the door of the trauma bay, opened it, and stepped into the corridor. The two men in suits turned to look at him with the unhurried deliberateness of people who have been expecting this moment and are entirely untroubled by it. The nearer one was tall, mid-50s, with the kind of face that had been assembled specifically to be forgettable. Nothing distinctive, nothing memorable, a face designed by committee to leave no impression. He had a laminated badge clipped to the breast pocket of his jacket, but Webb was close enough to read it only partially before the man shifted almost imperceptibly, blocking it. "Dr. Webb," the man said. That was the first wrong thing. Webb had not introduced himself to these men. He had not spoken to them. He did not know them. "You know my name," Webb said. "We know quite a bit," the man said pleasantly. "How is our patient?" "Your patient?" Webb kept his voice level with the effort of someone who has spent 11 years learning that their voice is a clinical instrument and cannot be allowed to become a personal one. "I'm not sure I know what that means." "It means we have an interest in his welfare," the man said, "and in the welfare of everyone treating him." The second man had not spoken. He was shorter, younger, with a kind of stillness that was a different quality from John's stillness or Ava's stillness. It was not combat-trained or crisis-managed. It was the stillness of someone who was always the one watching and had never seen a reason to change that arrangement. "Do you have credentials I can see?" Webb asked. The tall man reached into his jacket and produced a card. Webb looked at it. The agency name meant nothing specific to him. It was a 3-letter abbreviation that could have belonged to any of a dozen federal departments. But the weight of the card and the quality of the printing told him it was genuine. "What do you want?" Webb asked. "We want to come in," the tall man said. "That's a trauma bay. Access is restricted to treating staff." "Dr. Webb." The pleasant tone did not change. That was the second wrong thing, the pleasantness. Real concern did not sound like that. Pleasantness of that particular quality was a tool. "I want to be straightforward with you because I think you're a reasonable man, and this situation is going to go a lot more smoothly if we're honest with each other. The patient in that room is a federal asset. The person currently treating him is also a federal asset. We are not here to interfere with medical care. We are here because there are significant security concerns about this situation, and we need to make a brief assessment of the patient, of the situation," the man said. Webb looked at him for a long moment. Outside the ER's main doors, somewhere in the middle distance, he could hear the sound of another ambulance arriving, the ordinary machinery of the night continuing its indifferent rotation. "Give me 5 minutes," he said. "Of course," the tall man said and smiled. Webb went back inside. 9:02 p.m. "Suits in the corridor," he said to Ava, quietly and directly, because there was no time for anything else. "Federal, they want access. They say you're an asset. They say he's an asset." He paused. "Tell me what that means." Ava had gone very still. She was still facing the patient, still in a posture of work, but she was not working. Her hands rested on the edge of the gurney, and her head was slightly bowed, and she was processing something at a speed that was not visible from the outside, but that Webb could feel in the quality of the silence she was projecting. John had opened his eyes again. "How many?" he asked. "2, Webb said. "Description." Webb described them. As he spoke, John's expression underwent a series of very small changes. The tightening of attention, the flicker of recognition, and then something that settled into a cold, specific alertness that was worse in some ways than the open aggression of earlier. "Mercer," he said. Ava turned around. "You're sure?" she said. "Tall one, forgettable face. That's a built feature, not an accident." He paused. Mercer was on the oversight committee. He had access to the operational parameters, all of them. The room processed this. Webb did not know what an oversight committee was in this context, or what operational parameters meant specifically, but he understood the weight of what was being said. The weight of it was in John's voice, in the specific way that betrayal sounds when it has a name attached to it. "He's one of your 4, Ava said. It wasn't a question. "He's one of the 4, John confirmed. The room was very quiet. Carla, who had been trying to maintain the fiction of charting through all of this, had given up that pretense entirely. Dr. Patel was standing with her back flat against the wall, her arms crossed over her chest, watching Ava with an expression that had moved through several stages of disbelief and was now somewhere in the territory of suspended comprehension. The look of someone who has realized that the story they are inside is much larger than the piece they can see. "Ava," Webb said, "what do you want me to do?" She looked at him, and he realized in that moment what it was about her that had been registering as different since she stepped forward. It wasn't just the calm, and it wasn't just the competence. It was authority. The kind that didn't announce itself, the kind that had nothing to prove because it had already proven everything it needed to in places this hospital would never see. "Tell them 2 more minutes," she said. He went back out. He told them 2 more minutes. The tall man, Mercer apparently, nodded with his constructed pleasantness, and Webb went back inside and closed the door. 9:07 p.m. "You need to hear this now," Ava said, and she was talking to John, but she was also clearly talking to the room. Because what happens in the next 60 seconds determines everything after it. John looked at her. "The paper," she said. "It's a confirmation code. You know what it confirms?" "Tell me," he said. "I need to hear you say it." She met his eyes. "It confirms that Operation Halcyon was sanctioned at the highest level. Not rogue, not internal, sanctioned." She let that land. "Which means the order to burn your nest didn't come from someone acting alone. It came down the chain." The silence that followed was the kind of silence that happens when something that was suspected becomes known. It is a different quality from surprise. It is the silence of a weight finally acknowledged, of something carried for a long time being set down, even if the setting down is not a relief. John exhaled through his nose. One long, steady breath. "How long have you known?" he asked. 3 months, she said. "And you came here. You took a job in an ER." "I needed to disappear somewhere visible," she said. "You hide in the open. You know that." "I taught you that," he said. "Yes," she said simply. "You did." Webb felt the room tilt. Not physically, everything was exactly where it had been, but the geometry of his understanding of the situation had just rearranged itself, and the new configuration was considerably more alarming than the previous one. Carla, apparently, felt it too. "Okay," she said carefully, addressing no one in particular. "I need somebody to tell me what Halcyon is." Nobody answered her, which was, Webb thought, an answer. 9:12 p. The door opened. Not knocked, opened. The tall man, Mercer, stepped inside, and he did not look at Webb, and he did not look at Torres, and he did not look at the nurses, or the resident, or any of the medical equipment, or the blood that was still visible on the floor. He looked at Ava. "Rios," he said. His voice was the same pleasant instrument it had been in the corridor. "It's been a while." "Get out of my trauma bay," she said. "That's not really your trauma bay, though, is it? You've been on staff for 3 weeks. A pause. "Although, given your particular background, I suppose you could run a trauma bay with a field kit and a prayer, so the distinction is somewhat academic." "You need to leave this room," Webb said. Mercer looked at him with the patient benevolence of someone who has decided, in advance, that the other person is not a factor. It was not aggressive. It was almost worse than aggressive. "Dr. Webb, I appreciate your dedication to protocol. I genuinely do. But this situation has exceeded the boundaries of your protocol, and I need you to understand that clearly so we can move forward without any unnecessary complications." "What kind of complications?" Webb asked. Mercer looked back at Ava. "The kind where a licensed nurse with a fabricated identity is found to have been practicing medicine under false credentials at a federal medical facility." He said it the way you might say the weather forecast, informative, impersonal. That's a serious problem, Rios, for you and for the hospital. Ava looked at him. Are you threatening this hospital? I'm describing a legal reality, Mercer said. John had been completely still during this exchange. Now he moved, not dramatically, not in the explosive way he had moved when resisting treatment, but with a deliberateness that made every person in the room unconsciously track him. He pushed himself upright on the gurney. His face went white with the effort, and the pain was visible in every line of his body. But he sat up and he looked at Mercer, and his voice, when he spoke, was the quietest it had been all night. Hello, Richard, he said. Mercer's pleasantness underwent a change. It was subtle. The practiced face did its job admirably, but something shifted in the eyes. A micro-adjustment, a recalibration. You should be lying down, Mercer said. You should be in a federal holding facility, John said. But here we both are. You have no evidence of anything, Mercer said. John looked at the evidence bag on the tray beside Ava. Mercer followed his gaze, and in that moment, in the half-second it took for Mercer's eyes to find the small folded paper in its sealed bag, the pleasant face cracked, just slightly, just enough, and what showed through was something considerably more honest. That's a confirmation code, John said. You know what it confirms. That paper proves nothing without context. The context is already placed, John said. 40 minutes before my nest was burned, I transmitted a packet, dead drop, 3 separate recipients who don't know each other and don't know you. That packet explains the context. He paused. You burned me, Richard, and I made sure that if you burned me, the fire would leave a record. The second man appeared in the doorway behind Mercer. Webb registered the body language shift between them, the quick, nearly invisible exchange of a glance, and felt something cold move through his chest. Dr. Webb, Mercer said, his voice completely steady again, pleasant again, reconstructed with impressive speed. I need you and your staff to step out of this room. Absolutely not, Webb said. This is a hospital, Webb said, and that man is my patient. And until he is stable enough to be moved, nobody in this room is going anywhere. Mercer looked at him, and then he looked at Ava. And what Webb saw in that look, in the specific assessment Mercer performed on Ava in the space of 2 seconds, told him everything he needed to know about how dangerous this situation had just become. 9:19 p.m. Here's what I know about you, Rios, Mercer said. His voice had shed the pleasantness now. Not hostile, just operational, the way a thermostat adjusts to a change in temperature. You were recruited at 23 out of a combat medical program in Pendleton. You spent 4 years embedded with DevGru as a forward medic. You logged 11 deployments, 3 of which don't exist on any official record. You were listed as killed in action in a training accident that also doesn't appear in any official record. He paused. And then you disappeared, which is what you were trained to do. And you spent 3 months looking for me, Ava said. Which tells me the operation is still active, and you need me for something you can't get anywhere else. We need you to come in, Mercer said. No. Rios, I said no. Her voice had not risen. It had, if anything, dropped, and the dropping of it had a quality that cleared the room the way a change in air pressure clears a space before a storm. I left that life. I built something here, something real. Something mine, and you sent a dying man through my door to flush me out. And I want you to understand something very clearly. That tells me everything I need to know about what you're running now. And there is nothing you can offer me that would make me walk back into it. He needs surgery, Mercer said. His eyes moved to John. Specifically, he needs surgery that requires a facility with a particular clearance level. A facility we can provide. I'm not going anywhere, John said flatly. You'll die here, Mercer said. It was not a threat. It was delivered with the emotional temperature of a medical opinion. Then I'll die here, John said. The second man in the doorway moved. Just a single step, forward and slightly to the left, and every person in the room felt the shift in the room's geometry. Torres, who had been standing near the monitor with the contained energy of a man who has decided he will intervene at the appropriate moment and is waiting to identify that moment, straightened slightly. "I'm going to need everyone to stay very still," the second man said. It was the first time he had spoken, and his voice was younger than expected and tighter, and it had a quality that Webb recognized from his time in conflict zones. The voice of someone who is trying to sound in control of something they are not entirely in control of, which was, Webb thought, the most frightening development of the evening so far. An unsteady person in a room full of fragile situations was a specific category of dangerous that training did not fully prepare you for. "Hey," Ava said, and her voice, somehow, cut straight through to the second man the way it had cut through to John an hour ago. "Look at me." The second man looked at her. "What's your name?" she said. A pause. "That's not relevant." "It is to me," she said, "because you're the youngest person in this room, and you're the most afraid. And I need you to hear me when I tell you that nobody has done anything that can't be walked back yet. But if you take one more step, we go somewhere that I cannot fix. Do you understand what I'm saying to you?" The second man stared at her. Mercer looked at Ava with an expression that was not quite anything. Not respect, not contempt, not the manufactured pleasantness. It was the expression of a man encountering a variable he underestimated. "Stand down," Mercer said quietly to the younger man. The younger man stood down. 9:26 p.m. The room held its breath. John's monitor beeped. BP 94/61. Still low, still wrong, but holding. Ava turned back to the gurney. She picked up the evidence bag. She held it out to Mercer. "Take it," she said. Mercer looked at her. "Take it," she said again, "because what's in there isn't the evidence. The evidence is already where he said it is, in 3 dead drops with 3 people who are going to act on it in 48 hours, regardless of what happens in this room tonight. This paper," she held it up, "is a message from him to you. And I think you already know what it says, but you need to hold it in your hand because that's what he planned. That's what he wanted. He wanted you to stand in a room full of witnesses and hold the proof of what you ordered." Mercer did not move for 3 full seconds. Then slowly, with the careful movement of a man performing a calculation, he reached out and took the bag from her hand. He looked at it. He looked at John. John looked back at him with those gray, tired eyes, and in the look was something that was not triumph and was not satisfaction. It was older than either of those things. It was the look of a man who had survived something that was supposed to kill him, and was still not certain that surviving was the same as winning, but had decided that it was enough. For now, it was enough. "We're not done," Mercer said. "No," John agreed, "we're not. But tonight we are." Mercer held the bag for a moment longer. Then he pocketed it. He looked at Ava one final time. That assessment again, recalibrating, filing something away, and then he turned and walked out of the trauma bay, and the younger man followed him, and the door closed behind them. Torres let out a breath that sounded like something collapsing. Carla put both hands flat on the counter and stared at them. Dr. Patel said very quietly, "What just happened?" Nobody answered her right away. The monitor beeped. The fluorescent light did what fluorescent lights do, which is nothing, indifferently. Somewhere outside the ER, the night continued its business. Webb looked at Ava. She was already back at the gurney, already back to work, her hands moving with the same steady precision as before, as if the last 17 minutes had been a brief interruption in a task she fully intended to finish. "Ava," Webb said. She didn't look up. "They're going to come back," he said. "Yes," she said, "they will. So what do we do?" She was quiet for a moment, her hands working, her face angled downward toward the patient who had walked, or been carried, into her carefully constructed ordinary life and blown a hole through it the size of a mission she thought she had left behind. And then she said something that Webb would turn over in his mind for a long time afterward. Something that was not a plan and was not a reassurance and was not the kind of thing they taught in any medical program he had ever been through. "We keep him alive," she said. "Everything else comes after that." Torres left at 9:31, not because he wanted to. He stood at the door for a long moment, looking back at the gurney, at Ava, at the whole impossible architecture of the situation he had helped carry through those double doors less than 90 minutes ago. And Webb could see him doing the math. The particular calculation that every person in emergency services eventually learns to perform. The one that asks how much of what you've witnessed tonight belongs to you, and how much you are obligated to carry out of this room when you go. "I need to file my transport report," Torres said. He was talking to Webb, but he was looking at Ava. "I know," Webb said. "It's going to have gaps in it." "I know that too." Torres looked at the patient one more time. John had his eyes closed again, but nobody in the room believed he was anything close to sleep. His breathing was measured, deliberate, the breathing of a man who has decided that controlled rest is a tactical choice rather than a surrender to his body's demands. "He going to make it?" Torres asked. Ava answered without looking up. "Yes." Torres nodded once, like that settled something, and he left. 9:34 p.m. The room had contracted. It happened naturally, the way rooms do when danger passes, and people begin to remember they have jobs and protocols and a life outside the crisis they were briefly swallowed by. One of the nurses had been pulled to another bay for an incoming chest case. Dr. Patel had not left. She was still against the wall, quieter now but present, watching Ava with the focused attention of someone who has decided, without quite articulating it, that she is witnessing something she needs to understand. Carla was charting again, really charting this time, her fingers moving with the steady rhythm of someone who has decided that the best response to an incomprehensible situation is meticulous documentation. Webb was thinking about Mercer. Specifically, he was thinking about the way Mercer had taken the evidence bag, the deliberateness of it. A man like that, and Webb had encountered the type before, in the corridors of field hospitals in conflict zones, where the suits always arrived after the shooting stopped, and the paperwork always arrived before the truth. A man like that did not accept something unless accepting it served him. He did not concede ground. He transacted. Everything was a transaction, and the question Webb could not stop turning over was what Mercer believed he had purchased by walking out of that room with a folded piece of paper in his pocket. "He's going to move the timeline," Webb said quietly to Ava. She was applying a fresh dressing to the shoulder wound, and she did not pause. But the set of her jaw confirmed she had heard him and had already reached the same conclusion. "How long do we have?" Webb asked. "Less than we need," she said. "More than he thinks." John opened his eyes. 40 minutes, he said. "Maybe 50. After that, he's repositioned whatever he came here with, and we lose the window." "Window for what?" Webb asked. "For getting me out of here in a way that doesn't end with both of us in a location of his choosing," John said. Webb processed this. The clinical part of his brain, the part that had been running a parallel track all evening, assessing injuries and interventions, and the ongoing negotiation between what this man's body needed and what it was being allowed to receive, ran its numbers quietly and arrived at an answer he did not like. "You are not medically stable enough to be moved," he said. "I've been moved in worse condition." "I don't doubt that. I'm telling you the physiological reality. Your blood pressure is holding, but it is holding the way a dam holds. It is not repaired, it is managed. Any significant physical exertion, any spike in cardiac demand, could drop you back to where you were when you came in, and the next time it drops, I am not confident we can bring it back up." John looked at him. "Then come with us." The room stopped. Even Carla stopped typing. "I'm sorry," Webb said. You're a trauma surgeon with field experience. 2 years South Sudan, 1 year Haiti. You said it yourself. You know how to work without a hospital around you. John's voice was steady and pragmatic, the voice of a man making an operational assessment. I need a medical officer, not a facility. I am not a military. I didn't say military. I said medical. A pause. I'm asking you. Webb looked at Ava. She met his eyes and said nothing, and the saying nothing was its own form of communication. She was not going to advocate for this, was not going to pressure him, was not going to use whatever authority she had established in this room to push him toward a decision he hadn't made himself. But she was also not going to pretend the request was unreasonable, because it wasn't, and they both knew it. Give me 5 minutes, Webb said. 9:41 p.m. He used 3 of those minutes to call the attending on the next shift and tell him there was a complication with a patient and to cover the floor. He used 1 minute to go to his locker and retrieve the go bag he had carried since his fieldwork days out of a habit he had never quite managed to break. He used the last minute standing in the corridor outside the trauma bay, his back against the wall, looking at the ceiling, doing the thing you do when you know the decision is already made, and you're just giving yourself the courtesy of pretending you're still deciding. Then he went back inside. All right, he said. Ava looked at him, and what crossed her face was brief and genuine and completely unguarded. A flash of something that was not relief exactly, but adjacent to it, the expression of someone who had not allowed themselves to hope for a particular outcome, and is now in the specific emotional position of dealing with it, arriving anyway. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me yet, he said. I haven't done anything useful. You will, she said. 9:44 p.m. The problem of moving John without Mercer knowing was the kind of problem that had a simple solution and a complicated execution. And Ava appeared to understand both halves of that equation with a thoroughness that continued to shift Webb's understanding of who exactly he was working with. Service elevator, she said. The one at the end of the corridor. You said it's keyed. Facilities has the key. Maintenance staff use it for equipment transport after hours. Who's on facilities tonight? Webb looked at Carla. Carla, without comment, picked up the desk phone, made a 60-second call, and put it back down. Dave Okafor, she said. He's been on facilities here for 9 years. He's also been complaining about hospital administration to me personally for about 7 of those 9 years. So, she left the assessment at that. Can you trust him? Ava asked. I can trust him not to make a phone call that benefits people in expensive suits, Carla said, which right now feels like the same thing. Ava nodded. Get him. While Carla went to find Dave Okafor, Ava turned back to John. She put her hand on his arm, a clinical grip, checking pulse at the wrist. But the contact was also something more than clinical. The contact of 2 people whose history had a physical language that neither of them needed to translate. Can you walk? She asked. Define walk. Sustained upright locomotion for approximately 40 feet. If you're on my left side, I'll be on your left side. Then yes. Webb had been watching this exchange with the detached professional attention of someone cataloging information he does not yet have a framework for. He had worked with partners in Sudan, in Haiti, in the particular intimate close-quarters professional bond that forms when 2 people are responsible for keeping other people alive in conditions that don't allow for professional distance. He recognized the register. He just had never seen it between a nurse and a special operations soldier in his own emergency room before. How long were you deployed together? He asked. He was not sure why he asked. The clinical situation did not require the answer, but something in him needed the shape of it. John and Ava looked at each other. 3 years, Ava said. 4, John said simultaneously. A beat. Ava looked at him. Something moved through her face that she did not bother to hide from Webb, but that she also did not explain. A complicated, layered thing with grief somewhere in its lower registers. 3 years active, she said. 4 years total. John said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. 9:52 p.m. Dave Okafor was 61 years old, built like a man who had spent 4 decades moving heavy things, and had the face of someone who had heard a great many things in hospital corridors that he had made a private practice of not repeating. He looked at the situation in the trauma bay, the patient on the gurney, the blood, the IV lines, the assembled cast of people who were clearly in the middle of something that did not appear on any schedule, and he said with remarkable economy of reaction, "Service elevator." "Service elevator," Carla confirmed. "I'm going to need the key back by 6 a.m., he said, "and I'm going to need someone to tell me, eventually, what I'm helping with here." "I'll tell you what I can," Webb said. "That's what people say when they can't tell you much," Dave said, but he handed over the key. 9:58 p.m. The corridor outside the trauma bay was empty. That was either luck or it was something that Ava had somehow arranged for through means Webb could not identify. And he had stopped trying to determine which, because both options produced the same operational result. Dr. Patel appeared in the doorway as they were preparing to move, her arms still crossed, her expression carrying the complex weight of a person who has processed enough of the situation to know that the right thing and the safe thing are not the same thing tonight. "I'm going to forget a significant portion of this shift," she said to Webb. "That would be appropriate," he said. "Whatever that man transmitted before he got here," she said, "whatever is in those dead drops, I hope it does what he needs it to do." Webb looked at her for a moment, this 4-month resident who had spent the last 2 hours flattened against the wall of the most unusual trauma situation of her brief career, and he felt a specific kind of professional respect that he did not have time to adequately express. "Go cover the floor," he said. "And Patel, yeah? You handled tonight well." She looked at him. Then she looked at Ava. Then she turned and went back to the ER without another word, because that was the right thing to do, and she knew it. 10:03 p.m. Moving John was exactly as difficult as Webb's clinical assessment had predicted, and John handled it with exactly the kind of iron self-management that was becoming, Webb thought, the defining characteristic of the man. He was pale. The pain was visible in every line of him, in the set of his jaw, in the quality of his breathing, in the way his free hand occasionally pressed flat against his flank, as if he could manually hold his own structural integrity together. But he moved. Ava on his left side, Webb on his right, and the 40 feet to the service elevator were covered in a silence broken only by the soft rhythm of monitored effort. "Mercer has a vehicle positioned at the main exit," John said, when they were in the elevator. His voice was thin but steady. "Possibly the north parking structure as well." "How do you know that?" Webb asked. "Because it's what I would do," he said. Ava pressed the button for the basement level. The elevator moved. "Where are we going?" Webb asked. "There's a loading dock," Ava said. "East side, street access. I have a car 2 blocks from there." "You planned this," Webb said. She looked at him. "I planned for a version of this," she said. "I've been planning for a version of this since I took the job here. Since you knew he might come." "Since I knew someone might come," she said. "Him or someone asking about him." The elevator opened. They moved. 10:11 p.m. The loading dock was cold and functional and empty, and the door to the east side street was propped open by a rubber wedge that had not been there earlier in the evening, and that Webb suspected had not been placed there by accident. The night air came in with the indifferent freshness of late October, and John exhaled sharply when it hit him, a breath that was partly pain and partly something that might have been, under different circumstances, relief. They got 20 feet from the door when John stopped. "Wait," he said. His body had gone rigid. Not with pain, the quality was different, the sharp alertness of a threat response overriding everything else. "What?" Ava said. 3 o'clock, the van." Webb looked. There was a van parked on the street 200 feet to the right. Dark-colored, running lights only, engine idling. The kind of vehicle that is entirely ordinary and entirely invisible until someone with the right training looks at it and sees what it is. That wasn't there an hour ago, Ava said quietly. No, John said, it wasn't. Mercer moved faster than you said. Mercer didn't do this, John said. His voice had changed. It had the particular flatness of a new recognition, a recalibration, something slotting into place that changed the shape of the picture. This is different. The response time is wrong. He didn't have this position before he came inside, which means it was called in from somewhere else. Someone was watching the building independently. Independently of Mercer? Webb said. Independently of Mercer, John confirmed. The weight of that landed on all three of them. So Mercer isn't the only one who burned you, Ava said. No, John's jaw tightened, which means one of the other three didn't wait. Ava was already recalculating. Webb could see it. The rapid internal processing of someone running scenarios and eliminating them. The specific, focused stillness of a mind moving very fast behind a face that is giving nothing away. Then she said, "Back inside, now." They went back inside. 10:17 p.m. The basement level of street, Arden Medical Center at 10 in the evening, was the kind of quiet that belongs specifically to the infrastructure of large buildings. The hum of machines, the distant percussion of pipes, the functional anonymity of spaces designed to support rather than to be seen. Webb had been down here maybe 4 times in 11 years. He knew the general geography without knowing the specifics, and the specifics, he was rapidly realizing, were what mattered. Storage and records on this level, he said, thinking aloud. Morgue is on the east end. The tunnel connects to the parking structure at the north end. But if Mercer has the north structure, not the tunnel, Ava said, they'll have it. John was leaning against the wall. He was doing it with studied casualness, one shoulder against the concrete, arms loosely at his sides. But the effect was that of a man conserving energy with extreme precision because he knows exactly how much he has left and is not going to spend it carelessly. His eyes were moving, cataloging the space with the steady, systematic attention that had not stopped since the moment he arrived. "How well do you know this building?" he asked Webb. "Well enough. HVAC access, utility shafts. Is there a freight entrance separate from the loading dock?" "There's a materials intake on the south side, pharmaceuticals and supplies. It locks from the inside with a keypad." "Do you have the code?" "No, but Carla might." He pulled out his phone. John's hand came up, not grabbing, not aggressive, just a flat, still gesture. "Stop. No phones," he said. "Not right now." Webb looked at him. "You think they're on the network?" "I think if Mercer has resources positioned outside this building, and someone else has resources positioned outside this building, then yes, the hospital's communications are a vulnerability I would exploit if I were them." He paused. "So I'd be willing to bet they're already doing it." The specific quality of the silence that followed was one Webb would later describe as the silence of understanding something you would very much have preferred not to understand. "Carla's still upstairs," Ava said. She looked at Webb. "Could she get the code without using a phone?" "She's got 11 years of relationships in this building," Webb said. "She could get the launch codes for a nuclear submarine if she asked the right people in the right order." "Then we need her down here," Ava said, "without using a phone." "I'll go," Webb said. "Careful with the main corridor," John said. "I know." 10:24 p.m. Webb used the stairs rather than the elevator. Elevators had cameras, and he was thinking about cameras now with a new and specific consciousness, and came up through the stairwell door into the first-floor corridor with what he hoped was the expression of a doctor engaged in the ordinary transactions of his shift. The ER to his left was in its regular evening rhythm. 2 nurses at the station, the sound of a television from one of the intake bays, the background music of a system that never fully stopped. Normal. Deliberately, blessedly normal. And the normalcy of it felt, in his current state of heightened alertness, like something fragile and precious that he was carrying very carefully. Carla was at the desk. She looked up when she saw him. Her expression asked the question without her face moving into anything that would attract attention. He walked past her, close enough to say, very quietly without stopping, "South intake. Keypad code. Bring it down the back stairs. 5 minutes." She did not react. She did not nod. She picked up a chart from the desk and opened it and appeared to read it. And Webb kept walking. And 3 minutes and 40 seconds later, she appeared at the bottom of the back stairwell with a post-it note in her hand and an expression of profound professional calm that he found, in that moment, more valuable than almost anything else he could name. "How did you get it that fast?" he asked. "Dave Okafor," she said. "He does the supply runs. He has every code in this building memorized and will tell you any of them if you ask him while he's eating, because his mother raised him to be hospitable." She handed over the note. "Are you going to tell me how this ends?" "I don't know yet," he said. "Are you going to be okay?" He looked at her. 11 years of working nights together, of bad cases and impossible calls, and the particular exhausted fellowship of people who have seen too much to be casual about it anymore. Carla, who had 3 grandchildren and a husband who waited up for her, and a laugh that could diffuse almost any situation in the ER. Carla, who had called Mercer's badge a bad sign from the moment she saw it, and had been right. "I think so," he said. "That is not reassuring," she said. "No," he agreed, "but it's honest." She looked at him for another second, then she said, "Go, both of you, get him out of here." 10:31 p.m. The south intake door opened on the second try. The post-it note had 2 codes on it, Dave apparently having logged both the current and the backup, and the 3 of them moved through it into the supply corridor that ran along the building's south face. It was narrow and utilitarian, lined with shelving and the flat institutional smell of boxed medical supplies. And it had a secondary door at the far end that connected to the south side service road. John was moving slower now. The 40 feet from the loading dock had been managed. The stairs in the corridor since then had cost him, and the cost was showing in the quality of his color and the increasingly deliberate nature of each step. Webb checked his pulse at the wrist as they moved, the way you check a tire for pressure. Quick, practiced, reading the data and the feel of it. 90 approximately, he said. Stronger than I expected. Good bones, John said. You have a sucking chest wound and 2 flank penetrations. Good bones, John repeated. Ava made a sound that was, improbably, almost a laugh. It was brief, a single exhale with a slight catch in it that in another situation might have been humor, and then it was gone, because the situation did not have room for it. But its existence, its brief, impossible presence in the corridor, did something to the texture of the air between the 3 of them. Car is on Ashton Street, Ava said. Blue, there's a kit in the trunk. What kind of kit? Webb asked. The kind you'd want if you were moving a critically injured man without hospital access, she said. Webb absorbed this. You have a go bag in your car. I have a go bag in my car, she confirmed. How long has it been there? Since the first week I started at St. Arden. Webb looked at her. You knew, he said. Not that he was coming specifically, but you knew something was coming. From the day you started here. She was quiet for a moment. They had reached the far door and she put her hand flat against it without yet pushing it open. And she stood for a second in the liminal space between where they had been and whatever was on the other side. And she said something that Webb thought about for a long time afterward. I knew because they don't let you go, she said. You can leave. You can build something new, something real, something that is entirely yours. And it will be real. It will matter. But the life you left doesn't close GDK when a door. It stays open. She looked at John. It stays open, and eventually something comes through it. John looked back at her, and in the look was the weight of 4 years that only the two of them could measure, and the particular ache of people who know that the thing they share is also the thing that cost them GDK they are still not finished paying for. "I'm sorry," he said, quietly, directly. GDK. She held his gaze for one long moment. "I know," she said. Then she pushed the door open. 10:39 p.m. The South Service Road was clear. They moved. Webb was on John's right, Ava on his left, and the night air was cold, and the street beyond the service road was the ordinary street of a city doing its ordinary city things. And for approximately 90 seconds, as they moved through the gap between what they had escaped and what was still ahead, Webb felt something that was not quite relief and not quite hope, but lived in the neighborhood of both. Then John said, "We're being followed." His voice was quiet, conversational almost, the voice of someone reporting a weather condition. "How long?" Ava said. "Since the door," he said. "Single person, staying at distance, not Mercer's style. He uses pairs. This is someone else." Webb did not look back. He had learned in Sudan that looking back when someone tells you not to is a specific kind of error that compounds quickly. "The third party," Ava said. "The third party," John confirmed. "Then the van outside wasn't surveillance," she said. "It was to push us out this exit." The realization moved through Webb like cold water. They had not escaped. They had been directed. The south exit, the cleared road, the apparent window, it had not been luck or their own operational cleverness. It had been an open hand pointing them exactly where someone wanted them to go. John felt Webb's pace change, the slight involuntary hesitation of a man processing a bad discovery, and he said very calmly without breaking stride, "Keep moving, same pace." "We walked into it," GDK said. "Yes," John said. "So what do we do?" "We keep walking," John said, "and we let them come to us. Because whoever is GDK us right now is not working with Mercer. And anyone who is not working with Mercer is, at this particular moment, at least theoretically, negotiable." "Theoretically," GDK said. "I deal in probabilities," John said, "not certainties." Ava said nothing. She was already running the calculation. Webb could feel it, could feel the quality of her focus change, sharpening the way attention sharpens when it has identified a target and is preparing for the specific kind of engagement that cannot be rehearsed, only survived. Ashton Street was 50 feet ahead. The blue car was visible under the streetlight. Behind them, the footsteps were getting closer. The footsteps did not stop. They were measured, unhurried. The footsteps of someone who understood that running changes the nature of a pursuit and had decided, deliberately, not to run. 40 feet behind them, then 35, the gap closing at the steady pace of someone who was not trying to catch them, but was making sure they knew they were being closed in on. The specific psychological pressure of a follow that is designed to be felt. "Don't look back," John said again. His voice was the same, level, operational, giving nothing to the night air. "Ava, the car, when we get to it, driver's side first. You drive." "I know I drive," she said. "Webb, trunk. Get the kit open before you're fully inside." "Understood," Webb said. He had stopped trying to process the layers of this situation and had defaulted, with the practiced efficiency of someone who spent years in field medicine, to the simple, sequential logic of immediate tasks. One thing, then the next thing. Don't calculate the total distance when every step is the only step that matters right now. 20 feet to the car. The street light above it cast a clean white circle, and the car sat in it the way objects sit in spotlights. More visible than everything around it, a target that was also a destination. 15 feet. The footsteps behind them stopped. All three of them felt it. The absence of sound where sound had been. It changed the air pressure of the moment completely, the way a held breath changes a room. "They stopped," Webb said. "I hear it," John said. Why did they stop? Because they want us to look back, Ava said. They did not look back. They reached the car. 10:43 p.m. Ava had the door open in one motion and was in the driver's seat before the door had finished swinging. Webb went to the trunk. The key was already in Ava's hand, extended backward to him without her looking. The practiced automaticity of someone who had rehearsed this moment in some interior way she would never fully explain. And he popped the trunk and found what she had described and more. The kit was military grade in its organization. Trauma supplies arranged with the kind of categorical precision that spoke not just of medical training, but of operational experience. The understanding that in the dark and under pressure, your hands need to find things by position, not by sight. 4 bags, chest seals, hemostatic gauze, a portable pulse oximeter, 2 field tourniquets, and at the bottom of the bag, in a hard case that Webb recognized as the kind used for sensitive electronics, something he did not examine because this was not the moment. He grabbed what he needed and got in the back seat. John was already in the passenger seat, his body arranged with the careful deliberateness of a man managing pain the way you manage a budget, knowing exactly what is available, spending nothing he didn't have to. He had turned his head to look through the rear window, and what he saw made him say, very quietly, "There." Webb turned. Standing at the edge of the service road entrance, in the thin gap between the building and the street, was a single figure. Not advancing, not retreating, standing with a stillness that was different from surveillance stillness. It was the stillness of someone who was waiting to be seen rather than trying not to be. "Male," John said, mid-30s. "He's not in a tactical posture." "He's alone," Ava said. "That we can see," John said. "Drive," John said. Ava did not drive. She was looking at the figure in the mirror with an expression that Webb could see in the rear view, the sharp, complex expression of recognition trying to surface through the discipline of caution. "Ava," John said. "I know him," she said. The car did not move. 10:46 p.m. "How do you know him?" John asked. His voice had not changed in tone, but the weight in it had shifted. Not accusatory, but precise. "He was on the exfil team for Halcyon," she said. "The last one. The one that went wrong." She paused. "He got me out." Silence. The figure on the service road had not moved. "Name," John said. "Callahan," she said. "Danny Callahan. He was Army, seconded to the operation for the extraction phase." "And after Halcyon?" "I don't know," she said. "I lost track of everyone after Halcyon. That was the point." John looked at the figure for a long moment. He was doing his calculation. Webb could see the quality of it in his face, the rapid internal negotiation between tactical caution and the information that Ava had just offered, and the weight they were each applying to her judgment against the weight of everything that had already gone wrong tonight with people they thought they knew. "If he was followed here," John said, "then opening that door pulls in whoever followed him," Ava said. "I know. And if he wasn't?" She looked at the mirror, at the man standing still in the thin edge of light. "Then he came here on purpose," she said, "which means he found me the same way you did. And if he found me and didn't report it, he had a reason." John looked at her. "You trust him." "I trusted him once," she said, "in a situation where the wrong call would have cost both of us everything. He made the right call." A pause. "That's the only data I have." "It's not enough data," John said. "It's never enough data," she said. "That's not what trust is." The figure on the service road raised one hand, slowly, deliberately, not a wave, a specific gesture, a single, flat-palmed raise and hold that lasted 3 seconds and then dropped. The gesture of someone who knows a language and is using it. Ava's breath changed, just slightly. "That's a Halcyon signal," she said. "Internal. It was never in any briefing document. You had to have been there to know it." John was quiet for 2 full seconds. Then he said, "Get him." 10:49 p.m. Danny Callahan was exactly as Ava had described. Mid-30s, lean without being slight, with the kind of face that had been outdoors a great deal and had the weathering to show for it. He got into the back seat beside Webb with the practiced compactness of someone accustomed to making themselves fit into spaces that were not designed for them, and he looked at John first, a direct, assessing look that John returned with equal directness, and then he looked at Ava. "You look different," he said. "That was the idea," she said. "The hair. The hair, the name, the paperwork, the whole thing." She pulled out of the parking space and began moving, because the car sitting still on Ashton Street was a liability that was increasing by the second. "Talk fast, Danny. You have about 90 seconds before I decide whether you're an asset or a problem." "Fair," he said. He looked at Webb briefly. "Who's this?" "He's with us," Ava said. "Talk." Callahan talked. He had been out of the service for 14 months, he said. Medical discharge. The kind that came with paperwork that said one thing and a classified addendum that said something considerably more specific. He had spent the first 6 months doing nothing, genuinely nothing, a deliberate decompression that he had not enjoyed and had not been able to stop. And then he had started pulling at threads. "Halcyon," he said. "The official record says the operation was compromised by external intelligence. Enemy asset inside the local network. Standard cover story for when something goes wrong that you don't want to explain." He paused. "I didn't believe it, so I started looking." "At what?" John asked. "At the financial architecture," Callahan said, "because that's where lies live. Not in the operational reports, those you can scrub, but the money moves in ways that are harder to fully sanitize, especially when the timeline is compressed." He looked at John. Operation Halcyon had a secondary funding stream that doesn't appear in any official budget. It was routed through 3 layers of shell architecture and ultimately traces back to a private contractor with intelligence community contracts. A pause. A contractor that Richard Mercer sits on the advisory board of. The car was quiet. "That's not proof of anything on its own," John said. "No," Callahan agreed. "But the timing of the contractor's most significant government contract award is interesting. It came through 6 weeks after Halcyon concluded. 6 weeks after the official report declared the operation a partial failure and recommended a restructuring of the Oversight Committee." He leaned forward slightly. "The restructuring that put Mercer in the chair." Webb, who had been following this conversation with the focused attention of a man trying to hold a map of territory he has never visited, said, "So Halcyon failing was worth something to him." "Halcyon failing the way it did was worth something specific," Callahan said. "The parameters of the failure, which assets were burned, which operations were shut down, what intelligence was officially declared compromised, all of it created a vacuum in the oversight structure. A vacuum that was filled in a very particular way by a very particular group of people. And Mercer was at the center of all of it." "How long have you known this?" Ava asked. 8 months, Callahan said. "I've been building the case for 8 months." "Alone?" John asked. "Mostly alone," Callahan said. And then, after a brief pause that carried considerable weight, "I found Ava 3 weeks ago." The car turned a corner. Ava's hands on the wheel were completely steady. "You found her," John said. "Yes." "And you didn't report it?" "No." "Why?" Callahan looked at the back of Ava's head. When he spoke, it was quietly, with the plainness of something that has been thought through many times and arrived at the same place each time. "Because she built something real. I watched her for a week before I decided. She had a life. A small, genuine life. And the people who would have wanted to know her location were exactly the people I had spent 8 months documenting." He paused. "So I didn't report it. I kept it. And I told myself I'd only use it if I had no other option." "And tonight," Ava said. "Tonight you ran out of options," he said. "So I did too." 11:02 p.m. They drove for 12 minutes without destination. A moving target is harder to fix than a stationary one, and none of them had articulated that principle, but all of them were operating by it. While Callahan finished laying out what he had, Webb sat with his hands on the kit in his lap and listened and checked John's pulse at intervals and said nothing, because there was nothing useful he could add to this particular conversation, and he understood that. John said nothing for the first 8 minutes. He listened with his eyes closed, which Webb had learned was not inattention, but its opposite. The specific, focused mode of a man who processes information better without the interference of visual input. When Callahan finished, John sat with what he had heard for another full minute, and then he said, "The dead drops." "Yes," Callahan said. "You know about them." "I know about one of them," Callahan said. "The one you routed through the financial network. I've been monitoring that channel for 3 months." "Which means if you found it," John said slowly, "someone else might have found it." "Yes," Callahan said. "That's why I'm here." The car went quiet in a different way than it had been quiet before. Webb felt it. The specific weight of a silence that is not the absence of words, but the presence of something that everyone in the vehicle is processing simultaneously, and nobody wants to be the one to say first. Ava said it. "If the drop is compromised, the 48-hour clock doesn't mean what we thought it meant." "No," John said. "Then we don't have 48 hours, she said. "How long?" John asked Callahan directly. Callahan's answer was immediate and flat. "I don't know," which is worse than a number. 11:14 p.m. John said, "Pull over." Ava pulled over. They were on a commercial street, storefronts closed, the city in its late-night configuration of sparse traffic and amber streetlight, and the particular loneliness of urban space after the daytime population has gone home. She put the car in park and turned in her seat to look at him fully for the first time since they had gotten in. He looked bad. He looked like a man who had been running on will and training for the past 3 hours and was reaching the boundary of what those two things could sustain. The pallor was deeper, the quality of his effort more visible, and the hand that was resting against his left flank was pressing with a pressure that was clearly conscious and clearly necessary. "You're bleeding through," Webb said. "I know." "John." "I know, Jigay." He said it without irritation, which was almost worse than irritation. It was the voice of a man who has already incorporated this information into his calculation and is not going to change the calculation for it. "Give me 5 minutes, then you can fix it." He looked at Callahan. "The third recipient, the one you don't know about, who is it?" "I don't know," Callahan said. "Think about who I would trust." Callahan thought. His face moved through several expressions: consideration, elimination, a brief flash of something that might have been surprise. And then he said, "Fallon." John's expression confirmed it without words. "General Claire Fallon," Callahan said, as much to himself as to the others. "She was the original oversight authority before the restructuring, before Mercer's committee took the chair." "She was pushed out," John said. "Officially, it was a retirement. She took it because fighting it would have required exposing things that weren't ready to be exposed yet." "She's been quiet for 2 years," Callahan said. "She's been waiting," John said, "for something with enough weight to move, something that couldn't be explained away or buried." "The financial architecture," Callahan said slowly, "combined with the operational record of what actually happened during Halcyon, combined with the confirmation code." He looked at the evidence bag, which Webb was still holding. "That's enough weight." "That is exactly enough weight," John confirmed. Webb looked at the bag in his hands, this small, folded piece of paper in its sealed plastic envelope that had been taped to a field dressing inside a dying man's shirt that a government agent had accepted and pocketed and presumably still had. That was apparently one piece of a 3-part architecture designed to expose a conspiracy that had been running for longer than anyone in this car had been aware of. He looked at it with the particular feeling of a man holding something that is simultaneously ordinary and enormous. and he set it very carefully on the seat beside him. Mercer has the code, Webb said. Mercer has a copy, John said. You made a copy, Webb said. Ava made a copy, John said. Everyone looked at Ava. She reached into the pocket of her scrubs and produced a small, folded paper, identical in size to the one in the bag, and held it up between two fingers with the matter-of-fact delivery of someone producing a receipt. When did you, Webb started. While I was packing the wound, she said. The original is in the evidence bag. I photographed the code with my personal phone before Mercer arrived and wrote it on a notation card from the supply tray. She paused. Mercer took the original. He thinks he has everything. He doesn't. Callahan stared at her. Then he made a sound that was, unmistakably, a laugh. Short, genuine, the laugh of someone who has just witnessed something that recalibrated their estimation of a person upward by a significant margin. 3 weeks as an ER nurse, he said. How did you not lose your mind? I almost did, she said, and the honesty in it was so clean and undefended that the car went briefly soft with it. Okay, John said. He said it with the specific weight of a man calling a room back to the task. Not because the moment wasn't real, but because the task wouldn't wait for it. Okay, here's what has to happen. Callahan, you need to get to Fallon. In person. Not phone, not digital. In person. You have the financial documentation. I have it on an encrypted drive, Callahan said. Is it physically on you? Callahan reached into his jacket and produced a drive the size of a thumb and held it up. Then you go tonight, John said. Right now. Whatever you came here in, you take it and you go. What about you? Callahan asked. John glanced at Webb. Webb had already been doing the medical calculation, had been running it continuously through the entire conversation, with the background discipline of someone who cannot turn that part of his brain off. He said plainly and without softening it, he needs surgical intervention in the next 4 to 6 hours. The wound packing is holding, but it is not a solution. There is tissue damage in the left flank that will become septic without proper debridement, and his blood pressure has been in a compensated shock state for over 2 hours. The body has limits on how long it can compensate. 4 to 6 hours, Callahan repeated. He looked at John. There's a private facility, off record, used by people in our world when they need care that doesn't generate a report. He looked at Webb. It's not Johns Hopkins. Is it clean? Webb asked. It's functional, Callahan said. It has a surgical suite. Who operates it? A retired Army surgeon named Gaines. He's been running it for 6 years. Callahan paused, choosing words with some care. He's seen worse than this. He'll work. Webb looked at John. Your call, he said, because in this situation, in this particular arrangement of trust and risk in competing urgencies, it was the only honest thing to say. John looked at Ava. Ava said, I know Gaines. She said it simply, without elaboration, and the 3 words carried enough specific weight that no elaboration was needed. Then that's where we go, John said. 11:27 p.m. Callahan got out of the car at the next intersection. He and John looked at each other through the window for a moment, the look of 2 people who share a world that requires no words to summarize and no handshake to seal. And then Callahan walked west and did not look back, and Ava pulled back into traffic. Webb leaned forward from the back seat and addressed the bleeding, which had been waiting with the patient indifference of physiology for this gap in the operational demands of the evening. John bore it without comment, which was itself a kind of comment on the level of his tolerance, and Webb worked with the kit's supplies and the practice speed of someone who has long since made peace with improvised conditions. Gaines, Webb said as he worked. Do you want to tell me anything about Gaines? He saved my life once, Ava said from the front seat. 3 years ago, on an operation that was supposed to be low risk and wasn't. He worked for 6 hours without stopping, and at the end of it, he told me to get out of this business, and then he made me coffee. A pause. He'll take care of John. And after that? Webb asked. After that, Callahan gets to Fallon, and Fallon moves, and the packet goes where it's supposed to go. She kept her eyes on the road. And Mercer sits in a room very much like the one he was standing in tonight, except on the other side of the glass. Webb tied off the fresh packing and sat back. John's pulse under his fingers was thin, but present and steady. The stubborn persistence of a body that had been asked to do too much and was doing it anyway. "And you?" Webb said. He was asking both of them. The question applied to both of them equally. Neither of them answered immediately, which was itself an answer of a kind, the answer of people who have not yet allowed themselves to think past the immediate task, because the immediate task is not finished, and thinking past it is a luxury they have not earned yet. Then John said quietly, to the front seat, to Ava's profile in the pale wash of passing streetlights, "I never meant for it to come here. I want you to know that. I tried 3 other options before this one." Ava was quiet for a moment. "I know," she said. "I didn't want to pull you back into it. I know that too. But I didn't have anywhere else to go." She was quiet for a long time. The car moved through the city. The city did what cities do. It continued, indifferent and enormous, and populated by 10,000 lives that were not this one, each of them carrying their own weight through their own version of a night that would eventually end. "You always had somewhere to go," she said finally. Her voice was steady and simple and entirely without reproach. "That's what I need you to understand. Whatever happened, whatever they did with Halcyon, whatever they burned, whatever they built out of the wreckage of it," she paused, "you always had somewhere to go." John turned his head to look at her. She did not look away from the road. Webb looked down at his hands, which were competent and bloodstained, and had done everything they could do with what they had. And he had the distinct feeling of being inside a moment that was not his, and that he was being permitted to witness only because circumstances had arranged it that way. The feeling of being present at something private and true and earned through costs he could not fully calculate. 11:38 p.m. Ava's phone buzzed. She looked at it. A single glance, the quick downward check of someone managing multiple attentions simultaneously. And her face changed. Not dramatically, but it changed. "What?" John asked. She handed the phone back to Webb. On the screen was a text message. No name, no number, just a string of digits that looked like a confirmation code, and beneath it, 4 words. Webb read the 4 words. Then he read them again. Then he looked up. "What does it mean?" he asked. "It means Fallon already knows," Ava said. Her voice was very controlled. "Callahan didn't need to go to her. She's been running her own operation." A pause. "She's been running her own operation for 6 months, and she's been waiting for a piece she didn't have." "The confirmation code," Webb said. "The confirmation code," Ava confirmed. "How does she already have your number?" John asked. "She doesn't," Ava said. "She has Callahan's number, which means Callahan just called her from wherever he's walking right now, which means he moved faster than any of us expected. Or he called her before he found us," John said. The car went quiet. Webb looked at the phone again, at the 4 words on the screen. They were not threatening words. They were not aggressive or coded or ambiguous. They were the 4 simplest words in the English language, arranged into a sentence that was nevertheless the most complicated thing in the vehicle right now. They read, "She is coming in." "She meaning you," Webb said. Ava did not answer. "Ava," John said. Not an order, not even fully a question. Something older than both, the sound of a person saying a name to call someone back from the edge of a decision that has not yet been made, but is being made right now in the silence. "I don't know yet," she said. And for the first time since the moment she had stepped forward in the trauma bay and leaned down and said 4 words into a dying man's ear, her voice was not composed. It was not the voice of someone managing a situation. It was the voice of a person at a threshold, in the genuine, uncertain territory between the life they built and the life that built them. And the weight of it was real and present and entirely human. "You don't have to decide right now," Webb said. He said it because it was true, and because it was the only useful thing he had to offer at this particular moment, and because something in his chest recognized the specific quality of her uncertainty as the kind that deserves room rather than resolution. She looked at him in the rearview mirror, just briefly, a look that said she heard him and that the hearing of it mattered. Then she looked back at the road and drove, and the city continued around them, and John's pulse continued under Webb's fingers, and the phone continued to glow with its 4 words on the seat between them, and none of them said anything more for a long time, because sometimes the most honest thing a moment can do is just let itself exist without being explained. Gaines answered the door before they knocked. He was 63, gray at the temples, with the posture of a man who had stood over operating tables for 30 years and carried every one of those years in the set of his shoulders. He looked at John first, clinical, rapid, the assessment of someone who does not need a chart to read a situation. And then he looked at Ava, and something in his face shifted. Not surprise. The specific expression of a person who had calculated a probability and was now watching it arrive. "You're thinner," he said to her. "You're older," she said. "Fair." He stepped back from the door. "Bring him in." The facility was what Callahan had said it was, functional rather than comfortable, a converted space that smelled of antiseptic and the particular clean austerity of a place that takes its purpose seriously without making any claims beyond that purpose. Webb had been in field surgical units in 2 countries and 3 conflict zones, and he had the professional instinct to assess a medical space in under 10 seconds. What he assessed here was competent, stocked, and maintained by someone who had not let their standards slip because no one was watching. That told him something important about Gaines that nothing Ava had said had quite conveyed. "Through here," Gaines said, and they moved. 11:51 p.m. Getting John onto the surgical table was the first real fight he had put up since the trauma bay, and it was not the aggressive resistance of earlier. It was something quieter and more honest. The resistance of a man who was finally, genuinely, at the end of what his will could sustain and was having trouble accepting that the end had arrived. He gripped the edge of the table with his right hand, and he did not let go for a full 30 seconds. And nobody in the room said anything during those 30 seconds, because everyone understood what the grip meant. It meant he was not ready to be horizontal. It meant horizontal was the position of a person who had stopped being operational. And he had been operational for so long that the posture of it had become structural, had become the architecture his identity was built on. And lying down on that table was not a medical decision. It was an existential one. Ava put her hand over his. She did not pull it away from the table. She did not try to loosen his grip. She just placed her hand over his and let it rest there, warm and still, and she said nothing. And after another 10 seconds, his grip released, and he let himself go back. "Okay," he said, very quietly, to the ceiling. "Okay." Webb and Gaines moved. Midnight, the surgery took 2 hours and 14 minutes. Webb assisted and Gaines led, and the arrangement established itself naturally and without discussion in the way of 2 people who understand their respective competencies and have no time for anything but the work. Gaines operated with the efficiency of someone who has long since shed every unnecessary motion from his practice. No wasted movements, no hesitation, each decision made with the clean speed of someone who has made similar decisions hundreds of times and trusts the accumulation of that experience completely. Ava did not assist. She sat outside the room in a chair that was not comfortable, and she sat in it with the stillness she had been carrying all evening, the stillness that Webb had first noticed in the trauma bay and had spent the intervening hours understanding better. It was not the stillness of someone waiting. It was the stillness of someone who is in the middle of a decision that cannot be rushed and cannot be delegated and has to be arrived at alone. Her phone sat in her hand. The screen had gone dark. The four words were still there, behind the dark screen, patient and undemanding. She is coming in. And the question of whether those words described something that had already happened or something that was still being decided was the question she was sitting with in the chair that was not comfortable. In the anteroom of a place that had no official name, at midnight on a night that had started as an ordinary Tuesday. She thought about the 3 weeks at St. Arden. She thought about the apartment she had rented, small and unremarkable and entirely her own, with a window that faced east and caught the morning light in a way she had not expected and had found slowly over the course of several weeks that she looked forward to. She thought about Dr. Patel, who had been flattened against the wall all evening and had still said the right thing at the end. She thought about Carla, who had spent 6 years building a network of trust in a building, one post-it note at a time. She thought about Dave Okafor, who gave out security codes to anyone who asked him while he was eating because his mother had raised him to be hospitable. She thought about what it meant to build something real in a visible place, and about whether building it and leaving it was different from it never having existed, and about whether the people in it would be safe after tonight, regardless of what she decided. That last question was the one she could not get past. It kept returning, solid and specific, cutting through the philosophy of the rest. Would they be safe? She looked at her phone. She turned the screen on. She typed a message to the number that had texted her, 3 words, and she looked at those 3 words for a long moment. And then she put the phone face down on her knee without sending it. Not yet. Not until she knew. 12:47 a.m. Gaines came out while Webb was closing. He sat down in the chair across from Ava, and he rolled his neck once, and then he looked at her with the direct, uncomplicated regard of a man who has nothing to prove and no interest in performance. "He'll live," he said. She exhaled. It was the only thing she had not fully managed all evening. The breath that comes when something you have been holding against the worst possibility is finally allowed to release. She exhaled and she closed her eyes for 3 seconds, and then she opened them and she was composed again. But the composition looked different now, lighter, like a structure that has just been relieved of a load it was not designed to carry permanently. "The flank?" she asked. "Clean. We got everything. He's going to hurt for 6 weeks, and he's going to ignore that for at least 4 of them, which is what I told you the first time, and which has apparently not changed." He looked at her. "He asked for you, before the anesthesia took him." "What did he say?" "He said, 'Tell her the nest.'" Gaines paused. "I don't know what that means." Ava looked at her hands. "I do," she said. "Does it help?" "Yes," she said. Gaines nodded, satisfied with this. He stood up. Then he stopped. "The doctor inside. Webb. He any good?" "He's excellent," she said. "Good. I might need him in about 40 minutes for something that has nothing to do with tonight." He said this with the matter-of-fact delivery of someone for whom the overlap of unrelated crises was a familiar condition. "Don't go anywhere." He went back inside. Ava sat with what John had said. "Tell her the nest." It was a specific phrase from a specific context, from a night 3 years ago on an operation in a country she had not been officially present in, when a sniper's position had been the difference between the team getting out and the team not getting out. And he had held that position for 11 hours beyond what the operational plan had called for. Alone, because the extraction had been delayed. And when she had finally reached him, she had asked him why he hadn't moved, why he hadn't broken cover, why he had stayed in a position that by every tactical calculus had become untenable. He had said, "Because you knew where to find me." It had been about the operation at the time. It had been about the extraction vector, about the coordinates, about the practical fact that she had the team's location, and changing his position would have broken the line of communication at the worst possible moment. That was what it had meant operationally. She looked at her phone, at the unsent message. "Tell her the nest, because you knew where to find me." He was telling her that he had come to St. Arden for the same reason he had held that position for 11 hours. Not because it was the tactically optimal choice, not because the other options had been eliminated, but because she knew where to find him. Because wherever she was the place that, regardless of every other calculation, he could be sure of. And he was telling her now, from behind the door of a surgical room, with whatever was left of his voice after 2 hours of anesthesia and 6 weeks of healing ahead of him, that whatever she decided tonight, whatever she decided about the phone and the message and the 4 words and the life on one side of that decision and the life on the other, he had not come here to take it from her. He had come here because she was the only fixed point he had left. She picked up the phone. She looked at the unsent message. 3 words. She deleted 2 of them. She typed 1 different word in their place. She sent it. 1:23 a.m. Webb came out of the surgical room with blood on his gloves and the expression of a man who has just spent 2 hours doing the thing he was built to do and is feeling the specific exhaustion that comes not from effort, but from the release of effort, the letting down of the sustained attention that surgery requires. He pulled off the gloves. He sat. He looked at Ava. "He's stable," he said. "Really stable. Not managed stable, actual stable. Gaines is good." "I told you," she said. "Yes," he paused. "You always know things before you explain how you know them. I've noticed that." "Occupational habit," she said. He looked at her phone, at the way she was holding it, loosely, in the manner of someone who has just done something with it and is waiting to see what happens next. "Did you answer them?" he asked. "Yes." "What did you say?" She looked at him. Across the whole of the evening, the trauma bay, the corridor, the basement, the car, the service road, all of it, Webb had been the through line that did not belong here by training or obligation or prior history, who had stayed because he had decided to stay and had kept deciding it, hour after hour, without anyone asking him to reconfirm the decision. He had asked good questions throughout and had not asked the bad ones. And she had noticed this, had filed it in the part of her that notices equality of people under pressure. "I said no," she said. Webb looked at her. "Not no to Fallon," she said. "Not no to the operation. Not no to what Callahan is carrying to her tonight. That's already in motion, and it doesn't need me." She paused. "I said no to coming back in, no to active status, no to the designation. And you think they'll accept that?" "No," she said. "I think it's going to be a fight. I think Mercer's people will push, and Fallon's people will have opinions, and there are going to be conversations I don't want to have with people who have the authority to make my life complicated." She said all of this with the equanimity of someone who has already located the ground beneath this decision and found it solid. "But I've been in situations with worse odds than this." "St. Arden," Webb said. She looked at him. "You're going back," he said. "I have a shift on Thursday," she said. "Carla is covering Wednesday for me." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "Can I ask you something? You've been asking me things all night." "One more," he said. "When you leaned down to him in the trauma bay, the first time, what did you say? Because it wasn't his blood pressure. I know it wasn't his blood pressure." Ava was quiet for a moment. Outside, somewhere in the building, she could hear Gaines moving. The particular footfall of someone who operates efficiently in small spaces, doing the post-surgical work of a man who does not leave things half-finished. "I said his call sign," she said, "and I said mine." "That's it?" "That's it." "And that was enough to stop him," Webb said. "Not a question, a recognition. For someone who has spent long enough operating in a world where almost nothing can be trusted," she said, "hearing the one voice connected to the one name, connected to the one history that is genuinely and specifically yours. Yes." She looked at the door of the surgical room. "That's enough. That's more than enough." 2:09 a.m. John woke up at 2:09. Webb was there, monitoring, and he had expected the process of waking from anesthesia to be gradual. The slow surfacing that most patients displayed, the confusion, the temporary disorientation of a mind reassembling its map of where and when and what had happened. But John came up from the anesthesia the way he did everything else, with deliberate control, the consciousness assembling itself with visible effort, but in sequence, oriented before he opened his eyes, present before he spoke. His first word was her name, not the name on her hospital badge, her real name, the one she had set down when she took the St. Arden job and the apartment with the east-facing window and the small, genuine life she had built in the visible open. Ava came in from the anteroom. She sat in the chair beside the table, and she looked at him, and he looked back at her, and there was a long moment in which nothing was said and nothing needed to be. "Fallon," he said finally. His voice was the voice of someone working through the residue of anesthesia, slow and slightly roughened. "Callahan reached her?" "An hour ago," Ava said. "She's moving." "How fast?" "Fast enough," she said. "The financial documentation combined with the confirmation code, it's what she needed. She's been building the legal architecture for 6 months. She had everything except the piece that tied it directly to Halcyon. And now she has it. And now she has it." He absorbed this. His hand moved on the surface of the table, and she moved hers to meet it, and the contact was brief and deliberate, and said the thing that neither of them was going to say out loud in a room with Webb present, but that both of them understood completely. "Mercer," he said, "will know by morning that the code he took is incomplete," she said. "He'll know because Fallon will move before he can reposition, and when she moves, he'll see the shape of what he's actually up against." A pause. "He made a mistake coming into that room tonight." "What mistake?" "He came in to intimidate us," she said. "He stood in a room full of witnesses, and he accepted evidence, and he issued threats in front of 6 people who are not federal assets and who will remember everything they saw." She looked at him steadily. "He's been running operations in the dark for so long that he forgot what it means to do something in the light." John closed his eyes. Not with pain, with something closer to relief. The deeply physical relief of a burden being set down after a long carry. "The nest," he said quietly. "I got your message," she said. 2:22 a.m. Webb stepped outside to give them the room, and he stood in the anteroom and he thought about the night in the specific way you think about a night that has rearranged your understanding of something you thought you already understood. He was thinking about trust, about the specific, demanding, non-negotiable requirements of trust under pressure, and about how those requirements differed from the trust of ordinary life. The trust you extend to colleagues and neighbors, and the institutions that are supposed to hold everything together. He was thinking about what it meant to have earned the specific trust he had seen operating in that room all night, and what it cost to have it and to carry it, and why some people, once they had lived inside that kind of trust, found it very difficult to go back to the ordinary version. He was also thinking about his Tuesday shifts, about his locker at St. Arden, which now had a go bag in it that had been there before tonight, but that felt different after tonight. He was thinking about Dr. Patel, who had held the wall in the trauma bay and come out the other side with her integrity intact. He was thinking about Carla and Dave Okafor and a post-it note with 2 security codes on it, and what it meant that the infrastructure of ordinary competence and ordinary decency had been the thing that made the difference between tonight working and tonight not working. He was thinking about all of this when Gaines appeared beside him with 2 cups of coffee and handed him one without ceremony. "You should sleep," Gaines said. "Later," Webb said. "Later," Gaines agreed, as if this had been the expected answer. He drank his coffee. "She's not going back in," he said. It was not a question. "No," Webb said. "Good," Gaines said. And then, after a pause, "The first time she came through here, she was 29 years old, and she had been running operations for 6 years, and she had the eyes of someone who was running out of the thing that keeps people human in that kind of life." He looked at the door of the surgical room. She got it back. Whatever she built in those 3 weeks, she got it back. I'm not going to be the one to say that doesn't matter. Webb looked at him. You told her to get out of the business. I tell everyone to get out of the business, Gaines said. Nobody listens. But sometimes, he paused, considering. Sometimes they find a version of getting out that still lets them do the work. A version that costs less. He drank his coffee. That's the best you can hope for, usually. 2:58 a.m. The call came at 2:58, Ava's phone. She looked at the number, not Callahan, not the string of digits from before, and she answered it on the second ring. The voice on the other end was a woman's voice, measured, authoritative, with the particular quality of someone who has spent a long time in rooms where the weight of decisions is real and permanent. This is Fallon, the voice said. I know, Ava said. Callahan delivered what we needed. The packet is authenticated. We are moving in the next 6 hours. A pause. Mercer is being picked up at this moment. The room held its breath. John had his eyes open and was watching Ava's face with the same focused intensity he had turned on everything all night. And the others? Ava asked. The oversight committee? The contractor? All of it, Fallon said. The architecture is exposed. The financial record, the operational record, the confirmation code. When you put it all in the same room at the same time, there is no version of this that holds together. Another pause, and when Fallon spoke again, her voice carried something that was almost but not quite personal. You did well tonight, Rios, both of you. We had help, Ava said. She looked at Webb as she said it. I know, Fallon said. The physician, Webb. A pause that had assessment in it. We may want to talk to him. He'll make his own choices, Ava said. They usually do, Fallon said. One more thing, your status. Active designation. She said it plainly, without preface or softening. You declined. Yes, Ava said. A silence. The specific silence of a senior person processing a decision they disagree with, but respect. The designation is formally suspended, Fallon said. Not closed, suspended. That distinction matters in the legal context of what we're filing tonight. Another pause. What you did in that emergency room, what you have been doing for the past 3 weeks, in the open, as a nurse, that is not a less important version of the work, Rios. I want you to hear me say that. Ava said nothing for a moment. Then, I hear you. Take care of him, Fallon said. That's what I do, Ava said. The call ended. 3:17 a.m. The three of them, Ava, Webb, and John, who had pushed himself up to a seated position against Gaines's explicit instructions, and had been allowed to do it because nobody in the room had the energy left to argue with him about it, sat in the quiet of a space that had held, over the course of the past several hours, more weight than it was designed for, and had not collapsed. Mercer is being picked up, Ava said. John nodded once. The quality of the nod was the quality of a man receiving information he had worked toward for a very long time, and is finding that the receipt of it does not feel the way he imagined it would. Not triumphant, not hollow, but something more complicated and more honest than either. The feeling of a thing completed, the specific weight of a completed thing. Halcyon, he said, it'll take time to fully unwind. It'll take time, she agreed, but it'll unwind. Webb looked at both of them. He thought about asking what came next. For them, for the operation, for the 3 dead drops in the financial documentation and the legal architecture that Fallon had spent 6 months building. He thought about asking what happened to a man like John now that the thing he had been carrying had finally been set down, and the question of what to carry next was open. He thought about asking Ava whether the east-facing window would still be there in the morning, and whether the apartment would still feel like hers after tonight had passed through it. He did not ask any of these things, because he had learned in the course of the night the difference between questions that belong to you and questions that belong to the people living the answers. He drank his cold coffee. He looked at the ceiling. "I have a shift at 7, he said. "Go," Ava said. "Is that?" "Go," she said again. And the word was not dismissal, it was permission. The specific gift of someone telling you that you have done what you came to do and are free to return to the life that was waiting for you. He stood up. He put down the cup. He looked at John. 6 weeks, he said, minimum. Don't make me regret the stitching. 5, John said. 6, Webb said, and John almost smiled, which was the closest thing to a smile Webb had seen from him all night, and was therefore in context enormous. Webb looked at Ava one last time. She looked back at him with the expression she had worn since the moment he had said, "Let me work." The expression that was not gratitude exactly, but was the real thing that gratitude points toward. The recognition that goes deeper than thanks. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday," she confirmed. He went. 3:41 a.m. The room was quiet. Gaines had taken himself to whatever passed for sleep in a facility like this, leaving the two of them in the specific privacy of a space that was not personal, but had become so by the weight of everything it had held. John looked at his hands. His right hand, the one that had gripped the side rail of the gurney in the trauma bay with enough force to make the metal creak, it lay flat now on the surface of the table, open, and there was something in the openness of it that meant more than any version of the same hand held in a fist. "What did Fallon say?" he asked. "She said the designation is suspended," Ava said, "not closed." "Not closed?" He looked at her. "Does that bother you?" She thought about it honestly, the way she had been thinking about things all night, without the protection of a ready answer, without the buffer of clinical composure. "No," she said, "because I understand what she's saying. GK I did tonight happened because of who I was before St. Arden. Both things are true at the same time." She paused. "I used to think I had to choose, that the person I was in the field and the person I was trying to build couldn't coexist, that one of them had to cancel the other out." She looked at him. "Tonight changed that." "How?" "Because the nurse and the medic were the same person," she said simply. "In that trauma bay, in the basement, in the car, I wasn't switching between two versions of myself. I was all of it. Everything I learned and everything I built and everything I chose." She met his eyes. "That's not a compromise. That's just who I am." John held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm sorry it took me this long to find you." "You found me in 11 minutes, she said. "You bled out in a truck for 2 hours instead of going to a closer hospital. The closer hospitals didn't have you." "No," she said, "they didn't." She stood. She checked his IV line, checked his color, checked his pulse with a clinical precision that had never once stopped being genuine care, and she found all of it where it was supposed to be. Steady, real, holding. "Sleep," she said. "In a minute," he said. "Now," she said. He looked at her, and then for the first time all night, for the first time in what was possibly a very long time, he lay back and he closed his eyes and he let go. She sat in the chair beside him and she watched him breathe, and outside the window the city was doing the slow work of becoming morning, and the thing that had come through the open door of her life tonight had not closed it, had not taken anything from it, had only made visible what had always been true about the person standing on this side of it. Some people are built for the silence between crises, for the ordinary mornings and the regular shifts, and the small, exact pleasures of a life conducted in the open, where the stakes are human-sized and the work is the work of showing up. And some of those people have a history that would disqualify them from that life in other people's eyes. A history of operations and call signs and years spent in the spaces that official records don't acknowledge. Ava Rios was both of those people. She always had been. She had a shift on Thursday. She had an apartment with an east-facing window. She had a patient who was breathing steadily in a chair that would hurt his back in the morning and would not complain about it. And she had a city outside that did not know her name and did not need to. And she had the clean, specific knowledge of a person who has made a hard choice and found, on the other side of it, that the ground is still there. She sat with all of it. She did not try to resolve it or simplify it or make it smaller than it was. She just stayed, present, awake, and entirely, completely herself. That was enough. That had always been enough. And now, finally, she knew it.